The cruelest traps are the ones people walk into smiling. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a utility bill and a grocery store flyer. Evelyn Carter stood at her kitchen counter, a ceramic mug warming her hands while rain tapped softly against the window above the sink. The envelope was thick, expensive, the kind that announced importance before it was even opened. Gold lettering gleamed under the kitchen light. Daniel Brooks. She slid one finger beneath the seal and unfolded the card. The scent of fresh ink drifted upward. Saturday, 6 o'clock. The Whitmore Grand Hotel. Formal attire required. She read every line once, then a second time. At the bottom, written in neat blue handwriting she recognized immediately, was a personal note. Hope you can make it. It would mean a lot to everyone to see how life turned out for us both. Evelyn stared at the sentence. Outside, a pickup truck rolled through a puddle, spraying water across the curb. Inside, the only sound was the steady hum of the refrigerator. She folded the invitation carefully and set it beside a black leather folder resting on the counter. The folder was thicker than the invitation. Inside were contracts, account statements, and signed documents organized behind color-coded tabs. One tab carried a yellow label. Another carried a red one. Her fingertips rested briefly on the red tab before she closed the folder again. A small smile touched one corner of her mouth. Not anger, not sadness. Recognition. Across town, Daniel was probably rehearsing his performance already. She could picture it perfectly. The raised champagne glass, the carefully timed jokes, the sympathetic laughter, the subtle reminders that he had moved on and prospered while she had disappeared from the spotlight. The script was predictable because Daniel had been performing versions of it for years. Evelyn carried the invitation into her study. Sunlight pushed through a gap in the clouds, spilling across the hardwood floor. Shelves lined the walls, filled with binders and framed photographs. One photograph showed a much younger Evelyn standing beside a teenage boy in a graduation gown. Another showed a ribbon-cutting ceremony from years ago. She placed the invitation on her desk and opened her laptop. Several emails waited in her inbox. One carried a subject line marked confirmed. Another contained a finalized review schedule. A third included a digital signature completed less than an hour earlier. Evelyn scanned each message without lingering. Then she clicked a calendar entry highlighted in blue. Saturday, 5:45 p.m. Her eyes moved to the note attached beneath it. Everything is in place. She closed the screen. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner of the room. Tick, tick, tick. Every second sounded deliberate. On the desk sat a silver fountain pen beside a stack of legal papers. Evelyn picked up the pen and signed the final page waiting for her. The ink flowed smoothly across the paper. She capped the pen and slipped the signed document into a pre-addressed envelope. No dramatic speeches. No vows of revenge. Just another step completed. Another piece moved into position. The rain outside stopped. Sunlight brightened the room. Evelyn returned to the invitation one last time. Her gaze settled on Daniel's handwritten message. Hope you can make it. Slowly, she slid the card into her purse. Then she picked up her car keys from the desk. The metal key ring chimed softly as she walked toward the front door. Daniel believed he was inviting his ex-wife to witness his victory. What he didn't know was that the game he planned to play on Saturday had already started months ago, and every move since then had belonged to her. The following morning arrived bright and clear. Sunlight spilled across the polished floor of Evelyn Carter's study as she unlocked the top drawer of her desk and removed a slim silver flash drive. She turned it slowly between her fingers before placing it beside her laptop. The screen glowed with a row of scheduled appointments stretching through the week. Every box was filled. Every time slot had a purpose. Nothing looked dramatic. No secret meetings in dark rooms. No whispered conspiracies. Just accountants, attorneys, compliance officers, and financial analysts doing exactly what they were paid to do. Evelyn clicked into a video conference. 3 faces appeared on the screen. One attorney sat in a Chicago office with floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Another appeared from Dallas. The third joined from New York, No one wasted time on small talk. A document appeared on the shared screen. The attorney from Chicago adjusted his glasses and reviewed the final checklist. Evelyn listened quietly. Her notebook remained open beside her coffee cup. She made a single checkmark next to an item written in blue ink. The attorney looked up from his file. The review remains scheduled for Saturday evening. Evelyn nodded once. Good. Another document appeared. The notification will be released automatically once the conditions are met. Evelyn glanced toward the window. Across the street, a mail carrier walked past carrying a stack of packages. Everything outside seemed ordinary. That was the point. The most important events rarely arrived with flashing lights. They arrived through signatures, timestamps, and legal obligations. The meeting ended 22 minutes later. Evelyn closed her laptop and slipped the flash drive into the leather folder she had prepared. The folder now contained contracts, correspondence, banking records, and copies of disclosures stretching back years. Every page sat exactly where it belonged. Across town, Daniel Brooks was having a very different morning. The local newspaper featured a photo of him and his future bride smiling beneath a headline announcing one of the most anticipated weddings of the season. Several social media posts celebrated the upcoming event. Friends left comments. Business associates congratulated him. One post included a photograph of the ballroom at the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Crystal chandeliers hung above rows of white chairs. Daniel shared the image with a caption about new beginnings. Hundreds of people reacted within minutes. Evelyn saw the post while scrolling through her phone. She tapped the screen once, enlarged the photograph, and studied the ballroom layout. Then she saved the image. Later that afternoon, she drove to a small office building on the edge of town. The parking lot was nearly empty. Inside, a woman behind the reception desk greeted her by name. Evelyn signed a document, reviewed 2 pages, and placed them into another envelope. Before leaving, she paused near the front door as her phone vibrated. A text message appeared from an unknown number. Looking forward to seeing you Saturday. Daniel wants everyone there. Evelyn read the message once. Then she locked the screen without replying. Back at home, she opened a cabinet in her study and removed a storage box. Inside were old folders, photographs, and years of records. She selected one manila envelope and carried it to her desk. The envelope showed signs of age. The corners were worn. A faded date was written across the front. Evelyn opened it carefully. Inside rested several papers and a single handwritten note. Her eyes lingered on the signature at the bottom. Then she returned everything to the envelope and slid it into her leather folder beside the flash drive. Outside, evening settled over the neighborhood. Porch lights flickered on one by one. A train horn echoed faintly in the distance. Evelyn closed the folder and fastened the clasp. Somewhere in town, Daniel was preparing a celebration. He believed every guest was arriving to witness his success. What he did not realize was that every hour bringing him closer to Saturday was also bringing him closer to a conversation he had unknowingly started years ago. And this time, every answer would be recorded. Thursday arrived with a dry summer breeze, moving through the trees outside Evelyn Carter's home. By 8 o'clock in the morning, she was already seated at her desk. The leather folder remained open beside her laptop. But today her attention rested on the worn manila envelope she had removed from storage the night before. She slid the papers onto the desk one by one. The oldest document carried a date from nearly 12 years earlier. Property transfer. Another showed ownership percentages tied to a small investment company. A third contained handwritten notes from a meeting long forgotten by almost everyone involved. Almost everyone except Evelyn. Sunlight reflected off the edge of a framed photograph nearby. In the picture, she and Daniel stood in front of a modest office building years before success had found either of them. Their clothes were simpler then. Their smiles looked genuine. Evelyn picked up the frame, studied it for a moment, then placed it face down. Her attention returned to the paperwork. The truth had never disappeared. It had simply been filed away and allowed to age. Across the country, people spent fortunes trying to bury mistakes. The strange thing about records was that they rarely forgot. Around noon, Evelyn drove downtown. The courthouse clock tower rose above the surrounding buildings, casting a long shadow across the square. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. She walked through security and entered the records office. The clerk greeted her politely. Within minutes, a certified copy of a filing was placed on the counter. The clerk stamped it with a loud mechanical thud. The sound echoed through the quiet room. Evelyn thanked her, slipped the document into a folder, and walked back into the sunlight. Her phone buzzed before she reached her car. Another message from an unknown number. Looking forward to seeing your reaction on Saturday. She stared at the screen for a second. Then she locked the phone and slid it into her purse. A reaction was exactly what Daniel wanted. A disappointed expression. An uncomfortable silence. Maybe even visible embarrassment. The problem was that Daniel had spent so many years studying the version of Evelyn he remembered that he had never noticed the one she became afterward. That evening she arrived at a small office park near the edge of town. The building itself was unremarkable. Beige walls, clean windows, a modest sign near the entrance. Inside a conference room, 2 attorneys waited with laptops open. A projector displayed spreadsheets across one wall. Numbers filled the screen. Dates, transactions, ownership trails. Evelyn listened while one attorney traced a sequence of financial decisions stretching back nearly a decade. Each line connected neatly to the next. Nothing sensational, just facts. One decision leading to another. One signature leading to another. The chain eventually arrived at the present day. Saturday. The attorney paused. If he confirms the details publicly, there will be no dispute. Evelyn nodded. And if he does not? The attorney smiled slightly. The documents speak for themselves. The room fell quiet. Outside the window, headlights moved along the highway. Thousands of people drove home from work without realizing how many lives could change because of a single conversation. Evelyn gathered her papers and stood. Before leaving, she opened her notebook and wrote 3 short questions. Each fit on a single line. Each looked harmless. She closed the notebook. Back home, she placed it beside the leather folder and switched off the lamp. Darkness settled across the room except for the faint glow of the digital clock. Saturday was less than 48 hours away now. Daniel believed he had invited an audience to witness someone else's humiliation. What he did not understand was that the most dangerous traps were not built from lies. They were built from truths waiting patiently for the right person to ask the right question. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of bright summer sunlight that made every surface look sharper. Evelyn Carter stood in front of her bedroom window holding a navy garment bag. The dress inside was elegant but understated. No glitter, no dramatic statement, just clean lines and quiet confidence. She hung it carefully on the closet door before turning her attention to something far more important. On the dining room table, the leather folder remained exactly where she had left it. Beside it sat a yellow legal pad covered with notes written in neat handwriting. 3 questions occupied the top of the page. Nothing more. 3 simple questions that could easily pass as casual conversation. Evelyn poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down. Steam drifted upward as she reviewed the schedule for the next 24 hours. At 10 o'clock, a compliance officer confirmed receipt of a document package. At noon, an attorney sent a brief email containing only 4 words. Everything remains on track. At 2 in the afternoon, a notification appeared from a financial monitoring service. The review process was active. The timing matched perfectly. Evelyn closed the email and looked through the front window. A neighbor walked a golden retriever along the sidewalk. 2 children rode bicycles toward the park. The world continued moving as if nothing important was about to happen. In many ways, that was true. Most people in town would wake up tomorrow expecting a wedding. Only a handful knew that several unrelated events were quietly converging at the same moment. Late that afternoon, Evelyn drove toward the outskirts of the city. The road curved through a newer business district lined with glass office buildings reflecting the sun. She parked outside a private conference center and entered through the main lobby. A receptionist greeted her and directed her upstairs. Inside a meeting room, Two people waited beside a polished oak table. One was an attorney she had worked with for years. The other was a senior analyst from a financial firm. A stack of documents rested neatly between them. The analyst slid a report across the table. The trigger conditions are confirmed. Evelyn reviewed the first page. Several highlighted sections drew her attention. Dates, transactions, ownership percentages, verification stamps. She nodded once and signed the acknowledgement page. The attorney collected the paperwork and secured it inside a briefcase. No one celebrated. No one spoke dramatically. Professionals simply completed their jobs and moved to the next step. Before leaving, Evelyn paused near the conference room window. The city skyline shimmered in the distance beneath the afternoon sun. Her phone vibrated. A new social media post from Daniel Brooks appeared. He stood inside the ballroom at the Whitmore Grand Hotel, smiling broadly while workers adjusted floral arrangements behind him. The caption thanked friends and family for supporting his new chapter. Hundreds of comments followed. Congratulations. Excited for tomorrow. Beautiful venue. Evelyn studied the photograph for several seconds. Then she noticed something else. A reflection in one of the mirrors near the edge of the image. A familiar section of the ballroom. The placement of the stage. The position of the guest tables. She enlarged the image and quietly saved it. That evening, back at home, she packed the final items she would need. Her notebook, her phone charger, the leather folder, the worn manila envelope that had survived more than a decade. One by one, everything found its place. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times. Evelyn switched off the lights and headed upstairs. Tomorrow, Daniel would walk into a ballroom convinced he controlled the room. Investors would arrive. Friends would arrive. Family would arrive. Cameras would capture smiles and speeches. What none of them could see yet was that the most important preparations had already happened long before the flowers were delivered, long before the invitations were mailed, and long before anyone chose a wedding date. The board had been arranged. The pieces were already moving. All that remained was for the first question to be asked. Evelyn Carter woke before sunrise on Saturday. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. She stood in the kitchen, watching the first pale light spread across the backyard, and stirred a spoon through her coffee. Her phone rested on the counter beside her. Overnight, dozens of new photographs had appeared online from guests arriving in town for the wedding weekend. Luxury cars rolled beneath the entrance canopy of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Florists carried arrangements through glass doors. Event staff moved through the ballroom with clipboards and headsets. Everything looked polished. Expensive. Perfect. Evelyn scrolled through the images calmly until one photograph made her pause. A black sedan had pulled up to the hotel entrance. A tall man stepped out wearing a charcoal suit. Most people would have missed him entirely. The comments focused on the decorations and the venue. Nobody seemed interested in the man crossing the frame. Evelyn looked at the image for several seconds before locking her phone. 2 hours later, she arrived at a quiet cafe several miles outside downtown. The morning crowd filled the room with the sound of coffee grinders and low conversation. She chose a table near the back window. 10 minutes passed. Then the bell above the entrance door chimed softly. The same man from the photograph stepped inside. Ethan Whitmore carried no entourage, no security detail, no visible sign of the fortune attached to his name. He spotted Evelyn immediately. A smile appeared on his face before he crossed the room. "Good morning," he said. Evelyn stood. They exchanged a brief hug. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would attract attention. Yet the warmth between them felt genuine and familiar. Ethan sat across from her and loosened his tie slightly. The waitress arrived and filled his coffee cup. After she walked away, he placed a small envelope on the table. Evelyn did not open it. She simply rested her hand on top of it. "Everything is ready?" Ethan asked. Evelyn nodded once. "Everything." Ethan glanced toward the window. Cars moved steadily along the street outside. "He still does not know?" A faint smile touched Evelyn's face. "No." Ethan laughed quietly and shook his head. Some people spend years looking at numbers and still never learn how to see. The conversation shifted to ordinary topics after that. Travel schedules, business projects, a charity event Ethan planned to sponsor later in the year. Anyone listening nearby would have assumed they were old family friends catching up over coffee. Before leaving, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded photograph. The edges showed signs of age. He slid it across the table. Evelyn unfolded it carefully. The image showed a younger Ethan standing beside her outside a community center many years earlier. He could not have been older than 18. The confidence visible in him now had not existed yet. His smile back then carried uncertainty, hope, gratitude. Evelyn studied the picture before returning it. Ethan tucked it safely away. "I still carry it," he said. Neither of them explained why. They did not need to. Some debts were not financial. Some loyalties were built long before success arrived. When they stood to leave, Ethan checked his watch. "I should head back." Evelyn nodded. Outside, sunlight reflected from the windows of nearby buildings. Ethan opened the cafe door, then paused for a moment. "See you tonight." Evelyn watched him walk toward the parking lot. A few passing strangers glanced at him without recognition. None of them knew they had just walked past one of the wealthiest men in the country. None of them knew he would soon step into a ballroom where everyone believed they understood exactly who held power. By evening, that certainty would begin to crack. By late afternoon, the Whitmore Grand Hotel looked like a scene pulled from the pages of a luxury magazine. Valets guided expensive cars beneath the covered entrance while guests stepped onto the polished stone walkway carrying gift boxes wrapped in silver ribbon. Inside, crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across the ballroom. Servers moved between tables making final adjustments. A string quartet rehearsed near the stage, their music drifting through the room in soft waves. Daniel Brooks stood near the center of it all, smiling as he greeted arrivals. His tuxedo fit perfectly. His confidence seemed even sharper. Every handshake lasted a little longer than necessary. Every conversation eventually returned to his success. The company, the investments, the new opportunities ahead. People listened. People nodded. Daniel enjoyed every second. On the second floor of the hotel, Evelyn Carter stood alone in front of a large mirror inside a quiet guest suite. The navy dress hung neatly against her frame. Simple pearl earrings caught the light when she moved. On the table beside her rested the leather folder. The worn manila envelope sat on top. Her phone screen lit up with a new message. One sentence appeared. "Guests are arriving." Evelyn glanced at the clock. 6:15. She opened the folder one final time. The documents remained exactly where they belonged. The flash drive rested in its compartment. The yellow legal pad remained folded to the page containing 3 handwritten questions. She closed the folder and secured the clasp. A few minutes later, another message arrived. "Everything is active." She slipped the phone into her purse and left the suite. The elevator descended slowly. Soft instrumental music filtered through the speakers overhead. When the doors opened onto the lobby, conversations echoed from every direction. Guests crossed marble floors carrying champagne glasses. Hotel staff moved efficiently through the crowd. Evelyn walked calmly toward the ballroom entrance. No one paid special attention to her. That was fine. Invisible people often noticed the most. Near the doorway, she paused beside a framed event schedule. The wedding ceremony would begin shortly. A reception would follow. Speeches, dinner, dancing, everything organized to the minute. She studied the schedule briefly before stepping inside. Across the room, Daniel spotted her almost immediately. The reaction flashed across his face before he could hide it. Satisfaction, relief, triumph. She had come, exactly as he hoped. He excused himself from a conversation and crossed the ballroom. Guests turned subtly as he approached. Some recognized Evelyn. Others remembered pieces of old stories. Daniel extended his arms slightly. "Evelyn, you made it." His smile remained perfectly polished. Evelyn returned a polite smile. "Congratulations." Daniel glanced around the room. I am glad you could see all this. His hand swept toward the chandeliers, the flowers, the crowded ballroom. Evelyn followed his gesture with her eyes. It is beautiful. The answer seemed to disappoint him slightly. He had expected something else. Surprise, perhaps. Regret. Discomfort. Instead, she simply looked around as though observing the weather. Daniel recovered quickly and laughed. Well, enjoy the evening. Then he lowered his voice. A lot has changed since the old days. Evelyn nodded. Yes, it has. Daniel waited for more. None came. Across the ballroom, a hotel employee opened a side entrance to allow several late arrivals inside. Evelyn's attention shifted briefly toward the doorway. A tall figure entered accompanied by only one assistant. Several guests noticed him immediately. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Daniel followed their gaze and smiled. One of the most important people attending the evening had finally arrived. Ethan Whitmore adjusted the cuff of his jacket and surveyed the room. For a brief moment, his eyes met Evelyn's from across the ballroom. Neither waved. Neither approached. Yet something silent passed between them. Then Ethan turned toward a group of investors waiting to greet him, while Evelyn accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. The clock above the ballroom entrance moved another minute closer to the ceremony. The room buzzed with confidence, celebration, and certainty. Nobody could hear the quiet ticking of the mechanism already counting down behind the scenes. The ceremony ended beneath a canopy of applause and camera flashes. Guests rose from their seats while music filled the ballroom. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light as servers moved between tables carrying trays of champagne. Laughter drifted through the room. The atmosphere felt effortless, polished, successful. Exactly the image Daniel Brooks had spent months constructing. During the reception, the ballroom transformed into a celebration of achievement as much as a wedding. Large screens displayed photographs from vacations, business events, and charity galas. Investors gathered near the stage. Local officials stopped by Daniel's table. Everywhere he turned, people congratulated him. He accepted every compliment with the confidence of a man convinced the evening belonged entirely to him. Evelyn Carter sat quietly at a table near the center of the room. Her sparkling water remained untouched. The leather folder rested beside her chair. Occasionally guests approached to exchange polite greetings. Some seemed surprised by how composed she appeared. Others looked disappointed that she was not visibly uncomfortable. Their curiosity lingered only briefly before they returned to the celebration. Daniel noticed. Several times his gaze drifted toward her table. Each time he found the same calm expression waiting for him. As dinner plates were cleared away, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone to the next portion of the evening. Speeches, toasts, reflections. Daniel adjusted his jacket and rose from his seat. Applause followed him to the podium. He smiled as the room settled into silence. Thank you all for being here tonight. His voice carried easily through the ballroom speakers. He spoke about second chances, new beginnings, hard work, success. The audience responded warmly. Laughter followed several carefully practiced jokes. Then his attention shifted. Not abruptly, slowly, deliberately, the way someone changes direction while pretending not to. Life teaches us valuable lessons, Daniel continued. Sometimes people grow together. Sometimes they grow apart. A few guests exchanged glances. They recognized where the story was heading. Daniel smiled toward Evelyn's table. The important thing is moving forward. More laughter. More nodding heads. Evelyn simply listened. Daniel continued speaking. The confidence in his voice grew stronger with each sentence. Some people spend years holding on to the past. Others learn how to build something better. His hand swept toward the ballroom. The flowers, the guests, the stage, the success. Everything around him reinforced the point he wanted everyone to see. Then he looked directly toward Evelyn. I am grateful life worked out exactly the way it did. Several people shifted uncomfortably. The remark landed harder than the earlier jokes. Daniel seemed pleased by the reaction. At her table, Evelyn folded her hands calmly. When the applause faded, she stood. "Congratulations, Daniel." Her voice remained polite, measured. "May I ask something?" The room quieted slightly. Daniel smiled. "Of course." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "You still own the original investment company from 12 years ago?" The question sounded harmless. Business owners answered questions like that every day. Daniel laughed. "Absolutely." A few investors nodded. Evelyn returned the smile. "And the ownership structure has never changed?" Daniel barely hesitated. "Not in any meaningful way." Several guests continued listening now. The conversation had become more interesting than the speech. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. "That is good to know." Daniel leaned casually against the podium. "Why do you ask?" Evelyn lifted her glass and took a small sip of water. "Just curious." The audience chuckled softly. Daniel relaxed. The exchange felt harmless. He had expected resistance. Instead, he saw curiosity, the kind he believed he could easily control. What he failed to notice was the attorney seated quietly near the back of the ballroom checking his watch, or the financial analyst reviewing a notification on his phone, or the subtle vibration of several devices as automated messages began arriving at exactly the scheduled time. Above them, the chandeliers continued glowing warmly while the celebration carried on. But beneath the music and laughter, invisible gears had finally started turning. The ballroom remained bright and elegant, but the energy had shifted. It happened so gradually that most guests could not identify the exact moment. A few investors checked their phones. Then another. Then another. Small screens glowed beneath the tables. Quiet expressions replaced confident smiles. Daniel Brooks noticed the distraction but continued speaking from the stage. He laughed lightly and lifted his glass. "I suppose business never sleeps." A few people chuckled politely. The response felt thinner than before. At a table near the front, one investor read a message twice before looking toward a colleague across the room. The colleague had received the same notification. Near the ballroom entrance, the attorney who had been checking his watch earlier closed his phone and slipped it into his pocket. Everything was unfolding precisely on schedule. Daniel stepped away from the podium and moved among the guests, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. He stopped beside a group of business partners. One of them seemed distracted. Another looked concerned. Daniel frowned slightly. "Everything all right?" The men exchanged a quick glance. "Just reviewing something that came through." Daniel laughed. "On my wedding night?" Nobody laughed with him. Across the room, Evelyn Carter remained seated. Her posture had not changed. The sparkling water still rested in front of her. The leather folder remained beside her chair. She watched quietly as a financial analyst approached one of the investors and handed over a printed document. The investor studied the first page. His eyebrows lifted. He immediately turned to the second, then the third. Daniel noticed the exchange and started walking toward them. Halfway there, his phone vibrated. He glanced down. The smile disappeared from his face for the first time all evening. Another notification appeared, then another. The messages came from different sources but carried the same meaning. Compliance review activated. Ownership verification requested. Transaction disclosures under examination. Daniel stared at the screen. Around him, conversations softened. He looked toward Evelyn. She met his gaze calmly. Then she stood. The room seemed to notice simultaneously. Conversations stopped. Glasses lowered. Even the music felt quieter. Evelyn picked up the leather folder and walked toward the center of the ballroom. No rush, no drama, just measured steps across polished floors. Daniel watched her approach. "What is this?" he asked. The confidence in his voice sounded thinner now. Evelyn opened the folder and removed a certified document. The paper reflected the chandelier light. "Do you remember the original investment company?" she asked. Daniel forced a smile. "Of course." Evelyn nodded. "A few minutes ago, you confirmed publicly that the ownership structure never changed in any meaningful way." Several guests exchanged glances. The exact words were still fresh in their minds. Evelyn held up the document. That statement matters. Daniel's expression hardened. What are you talking about? Evelyn turned one page, then another. Every movement was deliberate. The ownership records, the transfer agreements, the disclosures filed 12 years ago. A financial analyst stepped forward and handed copies to several investors. Pages began changing hands around the room. Daniel looked from face to face. The reactions told him everything before anyone spoke. Surprise, confusion, concern. One investor lowered his papers slowly. Another removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Evelyn did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply presented records, dates, signatures, percentages, facts. The same facts Daniel had unknowingly confirmed moments earlier in front of hundreds of witnesses. Silence settled over the ballroom. For the first time all evening, Daniel had no prepared speech. No joke. No carefully rehearsed answer. Then, from across the room, a chair moved quietly. Ethan Whitmore rose to his feet. Every eye followed him as he began walking toward Evelyn. Ethan Whitmore crossed the ballroom without hurry. The crowd parted naturally as he moved forward. Conversations stopped one by one. Investors lowered their documents. Guests turned in their seats. Even the musicians near the stage seemed uncertain whether they should continue playing. Daniel Brooks remained frozen where he stood, his attention shifting between the papers circulating through the room and the billionaire approaching the center of the floor. Ethan stopped beside Evelyn Carter. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence carried more weight than any speech delivered that evening. Under the chandeliers, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, Ethan looked at Evelyn with the same respect he had shown her in the small cafe that morning. Then a warm smile appeared on his face. "Mom!" The single word seemed to travel through the ballroom faster than any announcement. Several guests blinked in confusion. Others looked from Ethan to Evelyn and back again. Daniel stared as though he had misheard. The room remained completely still. Ethan reached out and gently took Evelyn's hand. "I have been looking forward to introducing you properly for a very long time." Cameras lowered. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Nobody wanted to miss the next sentence. Ethan turned toward the crowd. "She is not my biological mother." A few people released quiet breaths. "But when I was 18 years old, she was the person who helped me when nobody else did." His voice remained calm and steady. "When I could not afford tuition, she helped me find a way to stay in school. When every door seemed closed, she introduced me to people willing to give me a chance. She never asked for recognition. She never asked for repayment." Ethan glanced toward Evelyn. She simply helped because she believed someone should. The ballroom remained silent. Across the room, several investors looked down at the documents in their hands again. The contrast had become impossible to ignore. One story was built on appearances. The other was built on records and actions stretching back years. Ethan released Evelyn's hand and stepped aside. He did not rescue her. He did not argue on her behalf. He did not need to. Everything important had already happened. The documents spoke. The timelines matched. The disclosures existed. The ownership records were real. Daniel had confirmed the crucial details himself. All Ethan had done was reveal another truth. Guests began seeing the evening differently. They remembered Daniel's jokes, his comments, his attempts to present himself as the unquestioned winner of the past. Now those moments felt smaller, less impressive. At a nearby table, an investor quietly gathered his papers and slipped them into a briefcase. Another excused himself to make a phone call. A third stared at the compliance notices on his screen. No arguments followed. No dramatic confrontation erupted. Reality simply settled over the room. Daniel looked around as the atmosphere he had spent months creating slowly dissolved. The admiration was gone. The certainty was gone. For the first time all evening, he stood alone in a crowd he thought belonged to him. Evelyn closed the leather folder and secured the clasp. Her work was finished. She had not shouted. She had not demanded revenge. She had simply asked the right questions and allowed the truth to arrive on its own schedule. Outside, night had settled over the city. Through the ballroom windows, distant lights shimmered against the dark sky. Evelyn walked toward the exit. Ethan followed a few steps behind. Near the doorway, she paused and glanced back one final time. The celebration continued in fragments. Small conversations, quiet departures, unanswered phone calls. Then she turned and stepped into the cool evening air. The city felt peaceful. A breeze moved gently through the trees lining the hotel entrance. Ethan opened the door of a waiting car and smiled. Evelyn returned the smile. No victory speech was necessary. No final lesson needed to be spoken aloud. The people inside the ballroom had already witnessed it. Dignity had never asked for attention. It had simply walked in, told the truth and walked away.